everyone. Hope everyone's staying safe and healthy during these unprecedented times. My name is Asta and I'm part of the e-board for internationals at USC. Thank you for joining us today for Bantering About Borders, one of our first events and probably one of the most important given everything that's been going on. Now and always, as international students, we have a lot of questions and concerns about immigration into the United States. And today we're really lucky to have John Khosravi with us, who will be answering all of your burning questions about immigration. John is the managing attorney at JQK Law Firm in Los Angeles, and he focuses on marriage green cards, immigrant investors, and applicants with extraordinary abilities. John has also taught immigration law at Pepperdine and Loyola Law Schools, and was the former vice chair of the American Immigration Lawyer Association's Law Student Committee. So yeah, a big welcome to John. Thank you very much for being here today. Is there anything you'd like to add about your background or what you hope to convey?
Sure, Asa. Yeah, thank you so much for setting this up, you and the rest of the crew, and thank you for the students at USC for joining. It's a really important topic, so it's just the timing of it is perfect. What to add? Well, just a quick. I'm a lawyer, so I always have to do disclaimers first. And as you know, we don't represent USC, the University of Southern California. This is an independent group, so the views expressed here do not represent them. And it's just general education stuff only. If you have an individual case, you need to consult with a lawyer in private because the details make all the difference, and we can't really talk about that here. But we're going to give you a good understanding about talking about this stuff. And yes, I'm an immigration attorney. I love immigration. I have a daily show I do on my YouTube page. You could follow me on Instagram, and I write stuff and have ebooks. All this stuff. We'll get to all that when it comes. But again, thank you so much, Asa, for having me on, and I just look forward to a good discussion.
Yeah, for sure. John and I both wanted to make this interactive. So while we do have a list of questions, if you do want to ask something throughout the live, please feel free to comment and we'll answer them as we go along. So yeah, to begin, John, one of the main things that people want to know in a general sense is that what is the immigration situation like right now, and what can we expect for the next couple of years?
Sure. So, in some sense, some categories of cases, depending on where you are and who you are, nothing has changed. But in a lot of other areas, there's been catastrophic changes, and the curve of it is towards catastrophic changes. That's going to really hurt a lot of people if the same situation continues. We just get surprised every day, but by the intensity and ferocity of the anti-immigration groups in the United States and the people in charge. So it's gonna be a mess, and we're gonna talk about all of that, how it affects you. And if you have questions, I'll say please let me know, because I'm gonna talk and I'm gonna lose track of the questions. But would you want to go through general processes first and then go into stuff like just general things they should know, or how do you think we should start this?
We already have a list of questions where people kind of prioritize what they wanted to know about, and I think given the current climate and ICE's guidelines, which they now rescinded and everything,
yeah,
people have a lot of questions about that. A lot of students were asking about if they needed any additional documents or information while arriving into the country.
Great, that's a great question. Let's start with that. In USC, the local airport you're usually to enter in is Los Angeles, unless you have a stop in a different city. And Los Angeles is a great place because I know a lot of the head people at CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, they're the people at the airport, and has great leadership there. I found them to be excellent people. There's a lot of controversy about the Department of Homeland Security and CBP, but I know individuals that are lead at Los Angeles, and I could really vouch for their genuine want to help people and not having animosity necessarily, or just being bad people or anything like that. It's just a difficult situation that they're in because they have a lot of responsibility, both being lawyers, essentially knowing the law, and at the same time being police officers. And you got to imagine when, for example, at midnight, when three boatloads, or not boatloads, but plane loads of people come in from China, all of a sudden we have 3 or 4 officers have to process thousands of people at once who don't necessarily speak English. They've been on a long haul flight so they're kind of cranky just from sitting in an airplane for so long. Everyone's worried about getting COVID-19, so they're in a very difficult position. So I understand what they're going through. But as a student, when you're coming in, there's several things you have to have in mind and be prepared for. First of all, you always have to look at your visa and see if there's time on it. Visas expire, and so you don't want to just get on a plane, come, and then realize it's expired. This doesn't necessarily happen to countries like China or Brazil or something, but there's countries where people have the visa waiver program, which allows them to come as tourists for 90 days. And so if your visa is expired, the airline might just see the ESTA or the visa waiver program and let you on. and then when you enter, it becomes problematic because you're not going to enter as a student, and that becomes an issue. Secondly, you always want to have an updated valid I-20. That's extremely important to always have that updated, so it shows your invalid status when you're entering. And if you're on OPT, which I guess we'll talk about more later, you want to have your EAD card that shows you're on OPT. At the same time, they've gotten really strict, and it's a focus of LEX, because the way the immigration system works in the United States, although there's federal law, each location, each chapter, each agency deals with things on their own way. So the airport at Chicago will deal with things differently than Los Angeles, than from Houston or Miami. And in LAX, a big push that they have, a priority, is to make sure that the students who are coming here are actually going to school and doing work, as opposed to people who just get a student visa as an excuse to come here and just hang out as an extended tourist visa. And so you'll see them come and ask you questions sometimes and say, well, who is your professor? What kind of grades do you get? What did you study? And if you can't answer these stuff easily, they're going to question you and not believe you're actually attending school. So you may want to have transcripts and just be prepared to be grilled on that if it does come up. I want to talk more about the procedure for coming in, but are there any questions about that? Or because I'm going to go deep into it in a second.
Someone just asked if you have any advice for new international freshmen in particular. I mean, personally, I know that there was a new guideline, I think, that was put out about new freshmen or new incoming students into the United States.
Well, from the immigration offices or from USC internally?
No, from the immigration offices.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure which guideline I'm talking about. So many, but they pulled back on one that they had about if you're doing an online course. In general, one issue that comes is what country you're coming from, because there's COVID-19 travel bans. So if you're coming from China, Brazil, Iran, or most of the European countries, part of the EU, and Ireland, UK, you might get hit with a COVID-19 travel ban and need to get a waiver of that to be able to enter the United States. I think they did update it to make it more lenient on students. So that may be what you're talking. Is that what you're talking about? That COVID-19 exemption. But the problem is, there's a lot of these travel bans have exceptions and exemptions and all this kind of stuff, but not everyone understands them. So you might run into an officer that doesn't know it, or an embassy officer that doesn't know it, but more likely you might run into an airline agency, or so, let me backtrack. You might run into someone at the airport who has an issue. So in those kind of cases, I've had cases where people are from Bulgaria, which are not subject to any travel bans, go to the airport and try to fly in, and the airline just says, oh, you're from Europe, it's travel ban. And when you try to explain the laws to them, they're not hearing it. Now, the Customs and Border Protection, CBP, did set up a program for the airlines to be able to call CBP and confirm this stuff. It's called the Regional Carrier Liaison Program, RC, Regional Carrier Liaison, LP. Yeah, I think that's it. And it's a hotline designed for the airlines to call and to confirm stuff. But what I found is the airlines don't do the work in calling it in, and so that becomes problematic. But that's a backup fail-safe system that exists. But overall, in general, right now, students should generally be able to come in under normal circumstances. But there's always issues that may pop up. But you always want to have, your I-20, your visa in order, be prepared to answer questions. If you do come in, sometimes they'll need to review your case more. And so one thing they'll do is, because that initial entry at the first line, they can't have that line piling up and getting backed up. They'll send you to what's called secondary inspection. And then you'll wait in the room for your turn to talk with an officer more, to go into more details. Sometimes you might wait 1, 2, or 3 hours before they get to you. And once they do get to you, it's only like a 1 or 2 minute conversation. And you're like, well, I waited 3 hours, but it's a first come, first go system. So that's what we have to do for that. So it's not necessarily always a bad thing that you go in that room. It's a bad thing because you're held up, but a lot of times people just go through it. It's additional questioning, but sometimes it gets really bad. And I'm going to go into that detail in a second, unless there's some questions in the meantime.
No, yeah, I think in the same vein, a lot of students wanted to know, like, if you are questioned or detained for that long, like, what rights do you have, or what level of discretion do the officers have in that process? Sure.
Unfortunately, as a visa holder, if you're in secondary inspection, you have 0 rights, essentially, and you have no right to an attorney. You're not in the United States. You're still considered outside the United States because you haven't crossed past the port into the border. And in that national security zone, you have 0 rights. So you have no right to attorney. If the officer is nice, they may call me. They probably won't. They may call one of your relatives or people locally just to let them know that you're stuck. but they may or may not do that. It's if they want to be nice. So that's why you got to be very careful. Again, there's no rights there, and you can't really do anything. So if you have issues, you really want to prepare it beforehand. And so one thing I sometimes do is, because I know some people at LAX, I communicate, and it's not any secret relationship. It's just their emails and phone numbers are online. You could contact these people through the LAX website, but I let them know, okay, I'm having a student come here who has this kind of problem. I just want to give you a heads up. If you need more information, I'm here for you. I just want to prepare you when you're coming in. And you could do this with most airports. Most of them are open, but it's a decision by the management and the leadership of that airport if they want to be open to talking with people beforehand. LAX is, so I'm able to just kind of communicate with them and give them a heads up if some problems are coming. But when you're at secondary inspection, essentially until you get out of the airport, you have zero rights, and that's very, very scary. They have the right to get your phone and look into it. Now, the courts have said when they look at your phone, you have to look at it as luggage. So if someone has their bag and it has a lock on it, you have to be able to open it so they can check it. So if you have a phone, you have no right to not lock it, or also just take your phone away from you and try to break it open in their technological ways. And they can look into it. But like a bag, they can only check what's inside that phone. So in a bag, there's clothes or whatever, they can check into it. On your phone, they're supposed to be only able to check what's on the hard drive of the phone. So again, I say supposed to do because they may not, but they're supposed to put as soon as they unlock your phone, they're supposed to put it in cloud mode or airline mode so they can't access the cloud. And so what they check is just what's on the cached hard drive of your phone. And so if you have recent emails that's on there, but there might not be history. They might not access all your photos. So that's something to just be aware of, that if something stays on your phone, it could be read, and that's where people get caught a lot. And I guess it goes forward into some of the questions people have. It gets caught because people have photos of themselves with paraphernalia for use of marijuana. They may have photos of themselves doing wild things. I'll give some examples. I had one client who contacted me from his home country. He had been kicked out of the airport, sent back to his home country because he was in a WhatsApp group, a large WhatsApp group, and one person had posted a video of people being tortured. From Middle East countries, apparently they share torture videos or something like that. I heard about this after U.S. entered Iraq in the war, and it was apparently a popular thing being passed around over there. And they saw that and they didn't like it, and they gave him expedited removal. I'm going to go into more detail on what that means. There was another woman who came in, it had pictures of herself holding a bong, and they said, oh, you do marijuana, you're out of here. Because it's very important to note, although California has said marijuana is legal, when you're dealing with immigration, this is federal law, the law of the entire America. And so that is still a crime to be in possession of marijuana, to use marijuana, and as a foreign person using it, that's an immediate reason why they could deny you entry and ban your entry from ever coming into the United States, with some exceptions and waivers and stuff like that. But essentially, it's very important to know as students in California, it's not legal for you to even just stay away from marijuana. Anything you could relate to or be in a photo with or talk about, anything related to that will get you in trouble. So you really want to not touch the stuff, even if your friends are doing it. Be mindful of DUIs. A DUI can invalidate the visa. So if you're in the United States as a student and you get one DUI, you could probably continue going to school here. But if you leave and want to come back in, there's a good chance that your visa has become invalidated, voided, and you'll have to get a new visa. And when you go to get your new visa, an officer could say, well, you have a health issue because you're addicted to alcohol, so you have to wait 6 months, a year to show that you've gotten better before we'll give you a new visa to come back in. And that's seriously going to disrupt your education. So again, they might invalidate the visa. You could stay here, and I want to make a note to talk about the difference between a visa and a stay. And there's another note I wanted to make, but I forgot what it was, but probably get to it. But these are the rights. You have no rights, essentially, and be careful. Marijuana, no. DUI, drugs, alcohol, no. And, be careful. Any information online, your Facebook, online, your social, in your phone, all this can be used against you if they want to. Now, do they have time to look over everyone's phone? No. It's a very 0.001% of people traveling to the United States have their phones checked. But when you have like 1 million people a year coming in to LAX, and I can't do the math, hopefully the math majors could do this, 0.001 adds up to some people, and I get the calls when it does happen. So I see how catastrophic it is for people's lives when you spend so much money, so much time, and all of a sudden you can't come to the United States and you can't finish your degree. So be prepared for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I guess absolute worst case, if someone does get deported, what rights do they have to appeal the decision once they're back home?
Okay, so I'm glad you made that was the point I wanted to make that I forgot to take a note on. So their deportation is an old terminology that everyone still uses. I still use it because people are used to that. But around 20 years ago, they changed it. They call it removal now to make it sound a little nicer. We removed you from the United States instead of deported you and kicked you out. If you're inside the United States already and you go through immigration court, eventually a judge makes a decision to remove you from the United States. There's an exception where if you entered on the visa waiver program, these are around 36 countries or so, or maybe more, mostly Europe, Japan, Australia, who could come to the United States without a tourist visa. If they have issues, they could immediately be kicked out, but everyone else who entered with a visa has a chance to go before an immigration judge and get removal. What we're talking about at this point a lot is the airport situation. And the airport has a lot of rights. Just border protection has a lot of powers under the Immigration Nationality Act to speed up the process of removing people from the United States. So if you do enter and you go into secondary inspection and they don't like what you have to say, they find problems with you, they'll do an interview with you. And a transcript will be given of that interview that specifies, or unfortunately doesn't really specify well the reasons or what they're going through. But for the most part, if I get that transcript, which you're supposed to be given a copy of, and I read it, it'll give me a really good understanding of what happened and ability to follow up on it. But essentially you have no rights and they can do what they want to do. And usually they give two options. If they're nice and they think the issue that you have is not too bad. So if they didn't feel like you were lying to them, it was an honest mistake, or if it's an honest error and they don't want to be too strict, they give you what's called voluntary withdrawal, which is they'll give you permission to say, you know what, I'm just going to go back, I'm getting on a plane and go back home voluntarily. And if you get that, you can still apply for a new visa. It's not good, but it's not a ban from reentry. You have to just try it one more time. So that's a good thing if you get voluntary withdrawal, which is what most people do get. Now, that still means they may detain you for a day or two to review your case and put you on a plane to go back, which is a horrible experience. They call it being detained, but you're essentially jailed. You know, I've seen the location at LAX where they put people. It doesn't look too bad, but when you're forced into a room with maybe other people for a day or two and you don't know what's happening, you just got off a plane and you're freaking out, it's a horrible experience. So you don't really want to go through that. But if they do give you voluntary withdrawal, you could try to get a new visa, come back in, overcome the issue that you had. For example, I had one case where a person overstayed their tourist visa, left and came back in, and they didn't let them in because once you overstay a visa, then you automatically have your visa canceled. And in their case, they didn't realize that because they thought they had more time. And so they gave them voluntary withdrawal. They got a new visa, came back without a problem. Normally, I was surprised they were so strict. Normally, Customs and Border has the ability to just give you an instant kind of visa if they wanted to when they realized it was an honest mistake. But in that case, they didn't. The bad thing they could do is a thing called expedited removal. So instead of going to court to get like a full removal order from a judge, they could do it in an expedited fashion. And this was made to give more leeway, especially at the southern border, for border officers to just catch someone trying to come in illegally or without permission, to just get out of the country and not have to go through the whole court procedure. And in the way the Immigration Nationality Act was written, there's no appeal for this at all. It's like, you know, they're judge and jury there and they could just kick you out and nothing happens. And so there's not much you can do when someone gets expedited removal. At most, we could try contacting the port of entry, maybe going to the chief, and identifying the mistake or issue there is to try to get them internally to undo it. But this happens maybe 1 out of 10,000. This is rare. And frankly, most of the expedited removal orders I've seen were justified. So when clients came to me for a consultation, I told them I can't really do anything about it because they were right. They have full authority to do that. And so you have no rights, and they can do whatever they want. And that's why you have to be squeaky clean through this and be very prepared to answer any questions appropriately when you're going through this process. 99.9% of people have no problem, so it's not something necessarily to be scared or worried about. But when it does happen, it's a hard hammer that hits you. And unfortunately, you go out. And the expedited removal can lead to a 5, 10, or a year or permanent bar from your reentry into the United States. So it's severe, serious consequences once you do get expedited removal. So if you have the option where they'll say, we'll give you voluntary withdrawal, some people want to argue and fight it. 99% of the time, again, this is not individual case advice because you might be the 1%, but almost every time you want to take the voluntary withdrawal and, you know, retreat and then regroup and come back out again. You don't want to get expedited removal, and they could give that if they want to.
Yeah. Someone just asked whether, like, if they have issues at the border, are they going to be sent directly back home, or do they get to choose where to go as long as they're outside of the U.S.?
Usually they try to send you to the location that you came from. So if you have troubles and they don't want to let you in, usually it's there. But normally you get sent back home and you have to pay for the ticket yourself too. And you can imagine how expensive it is to pay for a ticket that's like immediately purchased. Sometimes they'll let you in and they'll say go to a thing called secondary inspection. In Los Angeles and downtown LA at the immigration office there on the second floor, I think it's second floor, they have a room where it's secondary inspections. People who they weren't sure what they're going to do at the airport, they don't want to keep them there. They say, okay, just go and talk to an officer there and deal with it. Those people they'll let in, or they may parole you in. It's a special permission to come in for a set period of time into the United States. But overall, they'll make a decision there, and they'll just send you back, usually to the home country, but sometimes to the country you came from based on that flight. You know, they don't want to send you back to the country you don't have a visa for, so it's usually back to the home country.
Okay, yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add on that topic, just about entering through like a border or?
You know, yeah, there's two things I want to mention. I want to clarify because I see this issue come up a lot. You know, a visa is something you get from a U.S. embassy or consulate, and this gives you permission to try to enter the United States or knock at the door of the United States. That's all it does. A visa, you get a B1 tourist, B2 tourist visa, you get an F-1 student visa. The embassy gives it to your consulate, and it gives you permission to get on a plane, to fly in, to knock at the door. When you knock at the door, the Customs and Border Protection opens the door, and they give you permission to actually enter the United States, which is what we've talked about. When you do enter, you get what's called a status. So you don't, the visa itself doesn't make a difference at this point anymore. It depends on the status that they give you to enter. So a lot of times we have students that are here and they're say, oh, you know, my visa expired, what's going to happen? The visa itself, if you're in the United States, doesn't matter because you're in. The visa is just to be able to knock at the door. But if you're in, it doesn't matter. If you do leave with an expired visa, you have to get a new visa to come back in. But when you're inside, it's all about maintaining status. And for student visa holders, your visas are granted duration or status. So you might see a D/S in your passports or in your online when you look up, and I'm going to in a second talk about this I-94 form, I-94. And that duration of status means you could stay in the United States as long as you maintain your student visa status. So you're going to school or you're going properly to OPT and you're not violating things. Now, when President Trump came, they immediately tried to change this to make it much more complicated and problematic, which I'm not going to go into now because it's too confusing. And there are a lot of lawsuits, and so far they've held up on it. And what they're trying to do is get rid of this DS, so there's a fixed length of time. So for example, when you come in on a tourist visa, you might have a 10-year tourist visa, but that visa is just a knock at the door of the United States to enter. Once you enter the United States, you get 6 months normally on most cases to be in the United States. And if you stay past 6 months, you're out of status and subject to removal or deportation. But as a student, you have DS. So it's really until determination is made that you're out of status that they can kick you out. But essentially to maintain it, you just have to go to school. There's a more complicated angle I could probably go into later, but I'm gonna stop there. When you are in the United States, when you enter from the airport, it's very important. The first thing that you do when you get back home or your place of residence, you go online and you check your online form I-94. So you just go into Google, type in form I-94. There'll be a page for the CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, where you can look up your entry information. And you want to make sure that the proper visa was given, that they didn't make a mistake. Because you might come in on an F-1, but the officer accidentally put your B1, B2 tourist visa in there and gave you only 6 months. So if there's an error, you want to correct that as soon as possible. You don't want that to linger and then fall out of status and try to fix it. So it happens rarely, but it happens enough where the online I-94, which talks about your status in the United States, has a mistake. So I always want people to check that. And one of the first things I do when people schedule a consultation is I say, you know, send me a copy of your passport biography page. And I use that information, I go to the online I-94, and then I check to see what status they came in, what name they had, they'll show their name, how much time they have, so I can make sure there's no errors there, because if there is, we gotta fix that really quick. That's the first thing we do. So I really recommend people check that out as soon as they come to make sure there's no problems there.
Okay, a lot of the other questions that we got were more to do with rights on a day-to-day basis almost. So a lot of people are asking what rights do students have during like criminal or civil proceedings, like if they're caught with a fake ID or arrested for DUI.
So that's a great question. The rights are all the same as any American person. Once you're in the United States, you have full rights. But that doesn't stop. The problems don't stop there. So you have full rights. You get a hearing in court, all that kind of stuff. But if you're convicted, in immigration, if you're not convicted, if you make a statement, an admission of a crime, but they then drop the charges, all that information could be used against you in immigration. So the criminal courts and rights are one thing. You have that just like a regular American does. But on the other end, the consequences are different because you could get kicked out. So if you use a fake ID, potentially that could be considered fraud. And even if they give you a slap on the wrist, potentially that could be something that leads you to be kicked out of the United States after you get out of the criminal courts. So fake IDs, lying, fraud, all this kind of stuff could have severe consequences, lead to either avoidance or avoiding of your visa, or potentially having removal proceedings instituted against you. So it's very important to stay away from all that kind of stuff. And also be careful, one thing that people aren't aware of is the consequences of falsely claiming to be a U.S. citizen. If you're not a U.S. citizen and you say you're a U.S. citizen, that's an easy way to get deported and never come back to the United States. It's essentially a death penalty in the U.S. immigration law for the last 30 years, that a false claim to citizenship is like one of the worst things you could do. You could probably get away with manslaughter and still stay in the United States, but a false claim to citizenship will get you out and no fixing it for a vast majority of the cases. So never claim to be it, never do that. Avoid anything that gives an impression of that. Never mistakenly register to vote, never vote, never go to jury duty if they get mistakenly called to go to jury duty. These are all things citizens can do, not a non-citizen. Even a green card holder can't do those. They could get deported too. So the criminal stuff, just rights everyone else, the immigration consequences are horrible. Another important thing that comes up is a thing called expungements. So, they have systems where you can request that some criminal history disappear. So if you apply for a job, for example, you don't have to list that in your employment record and it doesn't come with background checks. That works in civil stuff, employment, all that kind of stuff. But immigration does not recognize expungement. So if you have anything that's expunged, if you have an arrest that wasn't a big deal and let you go, you have to tell the immigration office this stuff. If you hide it in any way, in a visa application, in a USCIS immigration department form, and you don't mention it, this could be considered, and probably will be, material misrepresentation of facts, fraud and misrepresentation, and lead to a lifetime ban. So you always have to tell this up front. It's better you tell them and try to fix it, as opposed to not telling them, which the consequences could be the most severe is not being able to re-enter the United States.
Yeah, so basically like a million ways to get deported.
Yeah.
But what is your opinion on attending either public or student organized protests as an international student?
Yeah, you have the full right to do it. So practically speaking, not practically, because I'll tell you why practically is not a good idea, but you have the full right to do that kind of stuff. But practically speaking, when you're in a mob and they kind of lose it, and some people are there not to protest or have any sort of meaningful philosophical point, they're just there to attack people, rob people, or just have fun, they're drunk or high or who knows, potentially you could get grouped in with those people. So an officer could see you standing next to the hooligan and just assume you're together and arrest both of you. Or, someone might bump into a cop and they'll think it's you, and the cop says assault on a police officer. And then what are you going to do? Who's going to believe you? Are they going to believe the cop or you? So my recommendation is completely stay away from this kind of stuff, and even stay away from dialogue on this stuff. So if you're in a protest and you mistakenly get arrested, that has actual consequences. But if you're online talking about this kind of stuff, Trump administration, and you've probably seen it for people who are applying for visas on their DS-160 or DS-260 and this kind of stuff, they ask about your social media handles. Now, frankly, do I think they have the manpower to check this stuff out? No. But in the future, they'll have better computer algorithms that are going to go in your Facebook and all this kind of stuff. And knowing how they act, they probably bypass your passwords. They go into your secret accounts for all we know. So you don't really want to have, these kind of opinions even put out. I hate to stifle free speech, and especially when you're in college, you want to express yourself. But the reality is you are a visitor in the United States. It's a benefit that can be taken away easily. So really the only focus you should have as a student should not be on fun, unfortunately. It shouldn't be with friends. It should really 99% be focused just on studying to get the degree until you find some other option to stay here, then get into that stuff. I wouldn't have been this strict about it 4 years ago, but this administration hates the fact that students are coming here, even though you're subsidizing local workers, local students, and you're helping the universities. They hate the fact that you have OPT. They're doing their best to try to cancel that as well. OPT, we'll get into probably in a second, is your ability to work after you graduate, or CPT, work while you're in school. And they just want anyone who is, even people who are born here, they're doing everything they can just have zero immigration. The intensity of it is so massive, I never would have thought. It's not even realistic, because we're an international empire, essentially. We have people coming and going. So, you can't just shut down the whole thing. It doesn't make sense financially for us to do that. but the anti-immigration sentiment is just so crazy that I just say, just study and live a very boring life for 4 years or 5 years when you're in college or graduate school, plus that, and just focus on that and don't do anything out of the ordinary until cooler heads prevail and we have a more rational system.
I kind of have a follow-up question for that. So when you're applying for a new visa, like a work visa, or as a new incoming student for F1, do they also check your social media then, or no?
Yeah, I mean, they could check out all times and stuff. I mean, I doubt they do it, but it's always an option for them to check you out. And the administration is doing things. They're hiring new people just to do this kind of work. Like, and this is way beyond student visa, but when people apply for U.S. citizenship and they go through a process called naturalization, they're able to become, U.S. citizens and get it. But President Trump created a new group called the Denaturalization Task Force, which is to go back and check the paperwork of the people who became citizens to see if there's issues to take away their citizenship. So when you see that kind of animosity and that kind of mentality when you're funding that to that level, like there's always a risk. It's a small risk. There's a lot of students. A very small risk. I don't want to overhype in that sense. But if it does happen, the consequences are really extreme. So, just keep it clean, keep it safe, and just focus on studying. And another problem that comes up is what you're studying. Now, this doesn't happen to every country, but if you're, for example, from Iran and you're coming here to study fields that they think are risky or dangerous or national security, they could prevent you from entering the United States. So you're never safe, and I have a lot of Iranian students who come or enter the airport, especially in the last couple of months or before COVID, but like in January, where they're immediately put on a plane and kicked out. And there's one story just to show you how powerful the Customs and Border Protection is when it comes to expedited removal. There was an Iranian student that was coming in the port at Boston, and they held him for a couple of days. He was able to get some lawyers to file a lawsuit to stop his expedited removal in federal court. Now, this is a big task to get it passed, and a judge okayed it. So it was like, oh, wonderful. The judge sent a letter to Customs Border Protection to not send this guy back, to hold on to him because they're going to do more review. But Customs Border Protection Boston says, or Boston, Massachusetts said, oh, sorry, we let him go a few hours before we got the notice. Now, did that happen? The timing of the order and when they actually left didn't match up from some reports. But the judge then said, well, he's already out of here. He's out of my jurisdiction. Sorry, tough luck. I try to help. And it just goes to show a federal judge couldn't get them to act. And especially under this administration, we're seeing what's happening across the country where federal troops are coming in to quell protests. These federal troops are, a lot of them, a bulk of them, Customs and Border Protection officers. They may have never wanted to go and go into civilian life and be police officers. Their goal is to protect our country based on the borders and all that kind of stuff. But they're federal officers. They have to abide by the rules of the federal government and the chief officer, which is the President of the United States. And if his mentality is that you're coming from overseas, you're considered the enemy, and that's the way he's put it. Literally, you're the enemy. You're dangerous to America. That's what we have to deal with, and we have to, we have no power to go against that unless other, cooler heads prevail, voting and courts and stuff like that. We just have to be prepared for the worst.
Yeah, so you've talked a lot about the Trump administration, because it's election year. If the administration does change, do you see that creating any big progress, or would it stay the same for a few years?
It's really hard to undo a bureaucratic change. So even if someone comes in and wants to undo that, once somebody's in the system, look at Trump right now. He tried to get away of what's called deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA. And the courts keep pushing back. So once something is set in place in a bureaucracy, not just America, from across the world, from being a poli-sci major when I was in college and studying this sometimes, it's very hard to undo it. Plus, the people that are hired right now to go within the system are people that are pro this kind of stuff many times. They like it. So although you may change the rules, you have people that like the way the rules were, and in that bureaucracy, they can still try to do their best to enforce things, whether lawful or not. They still have a lot of leeway to get away with things. So no, I think once these things come to place, it'll take a long time to undo it. And there's that. So this is just how the life's going to be for my generation in the near term.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of other students had questions about work authorization and employment, and there were a bunch of questions about under what circumstances do international students have to file taxes, and what are the consequences of failing to do so. Okay,
so I'm going to go through those. Let me know if I miss any. The taxes one, I'll give you a general thing. It'll help you out, but it'll go. So, one important thing is people think about, well, what's next? You're here as a student, then what? Well, first of all, they have programs where you're allowed to get training in what you're studying. So it could be CPT, curricular or practical training. So when you're going into school, go do a course that's related to your field to get some experience. Normally, you have to wait 1 year of college or whatever your study is before they allow you to do that, unless you do a thing called first day CPT, which says the university has a special program where you immediately have to get on-job experience. Now, first day CPT is very controversial, and if you come in with at the airport or if they deal with you in the future for a green card case or whatever, they're gonna really focus on that first day CPT because a lot of times it could be fraud. There's a lot of these universities who have rights to bring international students as F-1 visa holders, but they may be scams just for a reason to get around work permit requirements. They say you're coming here to study, but you're really doing first day CPT as a way to do work for companies and stuff like that. So be very skeptical of these kind of programs and be very suspicious of them. You don't really want to get involved unless it's a really appropriate program they know is legitimate. They are cracking down and closing down these schools, especially like in LA and Koreatown. There's a lot of these universities they've cracked down on. And ICE is the enforcement agency for immigration. They've also set up fake universities to catch people, but they'll have conversations with them that say specifically things that are against the rules and the students should know, and they'll catch them on recording and give them bans for fraud, all that kind of stuff. So that's CPT. We have a question, I think, do you have to have a social security number for CPT? Once you get it, they'll probably issue it to you. You have to go to the social security office and request it based on having, an I-20 and this kind of stuff. I don't deal with CPT too often. A lot of the student visa stuff, to give you a heads up, and as students here know, very rarely do students hire immigration lawyers. So immigration lawyers don't necessarily know all the nuanced details of this stuff, especially for CPT because it's much rarer than OPT. I teach immigration law, I'm a professor and stuff, so I have to study stuff a lot just to do it, so I'm familiar with it. But you'll find is, if you talk to immigration law, they have to study this stuff. Nuance of the social security number, I can't remember exactly, but I think that you would request it from the social security office based on that. Now that's CPT. Now keep in mind, if you work on CPT full time, that takes away the time that you could do OPT later on. So OPT is optional practical training, if I'm saying it right. But this is once you graduate, you get 1 year of time to get experience in your field of work. And so when you're on OPT, if you had CPT and you work more than 20 hours on CPT, the amount of months you worked on CPT will take away from how much OPT time you have. So be careful for that. Now let's get into OPT because this is where a lot of problems happen. First of all, you can file for OPT 90 days before graduation. You have to file for OPT 89 days left till graduation. If you file too late, I've seen too many problems happen. And so I really don't want people to have these kind of issues because what happens with OPT is you have to get an updated I-20 from your school saying you're going to do this and the paperwork related to that. And you have to submit a form I-765 with a filing fee and I think passport photos as well. I'm not sure if they still have that requirement. And submit that to USCIS to get the EAD card, Employment Authorization Document, commonly referred to as a work permit. Now, like I just have a student right now who filed this, and when you filed for the OPT form I-765, your I-20 has to be less than 30 days old. It's a hardcore law that they have. The application got to USCIS on the 31st day. And they waited, and this person filed close to graduation. So it took 2 or 3 months until they got a denial decision. By that point, their grace period is over. So once they got the denial decision, they're out of status and they're here illegally now. And they don't have any more time to refile for the OPT to fix the situation. If they had filed it really early and got this denial notice, they could have gone to the school, got a new I-20, submitted, and it would have been fine. But now they're out of status. Now, this is in the same situation they came to for consultation. After talking for half an hour, 45 minutes, I realized that they've actually been a U.S. citizen since the time they were born. They didn't even know it. And so that's one thing that having immigration is really important. It's rare for this to happen, but it's happened in my career 5 or 6 times where people are U.S. citizens and they didn't even know it. They've been paying for immigration, out-of-state tuition, all this kind of stuff when none of that is necessary. So now we're working on her just getting a passport from the passport office because she's a citizen. And so she was freaking out because she has to go back to her home country. Her home country right now is going through protests. It's very dangerous. So she was really worried. But I'm like, just get the paperwork together. We'll get U.S. citizenship. So that's OPT. On OPT, you can't be out of work for more than 90 days. So you got to have consistent employment for not have breaks of 90 days. That's going to be problematic. And another thing is you always have to update USCIS if you change your job, change your address. I'm sorry, not USCIS, ICE. You tell your school, they update it in CVIS, which you're all familiar with, a record recording system there. But nowadays you have access to an internal system. You want to update it there too. If you don't update your work information, anything related to you there, that could be major problems down the line. So it's very important you update the government with your address, all that information. And again, I say that a lot of times because people don't do that and it becomes problematic later on. And then the next thing is STEM OPT, which is an extension you get if you're in the science, technology, E is engineering and math, STEM majors. You potentially get more time. When you add that more time, you get 60 days more of unemployment you can add to that. I'm not going to go too much into that because that can go into a lot of details. But that's the OPT system. I'm going to go into the next level things that happen from there, but I'll answer some questions before we get to there. But just keep in mind these worries I have about OPT, problems I see happening. You just got to be careful about this, not making those kind of errors.
Someone's asking, what's the best way to respond to the question, why did you choose to come back during COVID? Which I think like at the border, if an officer does ask that.
Just honestly, there's nothing. It's just very rarely would they ask something like that, but just be like, I just want to be in the U.S. and it is what it is. You might have an apartment you're paying money for. I'm like, I'm leasing a place here for the summer. Why let that money go to waste? Just be here. You're practicing your English here, and just whatever is natural. I don't think there's a wrong. They could be wrong answers. If you say I'm coming here to get high because it's illegal, that's a horrible answer. But if it's something that's normal and just do that, that's fine. I don't see any catch you kind of questions there.
Okay, and another one is, do we lose our CPT or OPT if we take a leave of absence and have exceeded the 5 months in our home country?
Exceeded 5 months. CPT is more flexible. The internet, okay, it's back. CPT is more flexible. OPT, if you're not working for 9 days, you could lose it. You got to talk with your schools. All this kind of stuff we're talking about here, you got to talk with your school because you could put pauses on this kind of stuff if needed. So you have to work with the international department, what they call a DSO, designated school official. Each university calls it their own name though, but they'll help you with this, put things on pause. There may be some flexibility, but again, for OPT, you don't want to not be working for 90 days. That could lead to cancellation of OPT. But CPT more flexible because it's not a requirement to be able to stay here. You're still going to school on CPT. But that's the best I can answer that question.
Yeah, so for OPT, do we have to be in the country for the semester before we apply for it?
No, OPT is just related to your graduation date. So if there's some breaks in school F1, that's fine too. It's just when you're graduating 90 days before and then 60 days after that grace period, you have that 150-day period to file for OPT. That's just the main thing. And again, you want to do it sooner because it used to be OPT, the work permit would come out for like 2 months. Well, they're so delayed and backed up. I have cases where it's taking 4 or 5 months. And so it's not clear, well, you can't work during that time, so you're passing that 90 days of unemployment. Is that problematic? Well, it's told, I haven't seen it be a problem, but all these worries come into place because we're having issues we've never had before. OPT never took more than 90 days to get approved, so it's never a problem to even think about that. Yeah, start early, but with regards to that specific question, absence in the student stuff is fine. You always have to talk with the school though. You don't want the absence to be a problem. Like one issue that pops up a lot, surprisingly, is students who pay the school tuition, for some reason the payment doesn't go through and they don't get notice that it didn't go through. They go to school every day, do their semester, and then at the end of the semester, like the transcript shows dropped. And they go to school and say, why did I drop? They're like, oh, you didn't pay at the beginning of the semester. And like, well, no one ever told me. That happens a lot. I don't know how that happens, but it happens a lot all over the country. And all of a sudden, they've been here for 4 or 5 months, out of status, major problem. There's a program called reinstatement to try to work with the school to do it, but not every DSO at the school is going to be helpful in that. And one thing I found, the level and sophistication and helpfulness of DSOs varies drastically between schools and within schools. So you never know. You might have an officer, a DSO that's really helpful, a national student officer that goes the extra mile to help you, and they might have one that you keep calling and you can never get a hold of to even help you out. I've seen that consistently throughout the country. So there's a lot that could go wrong in this kind of stuff. So you really want to always be on top of your paperwork. And I found students are focused on school. There's a lot extra stuff that no one worries about, if they're studying the home country. But there's a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork that you always have to keep an eye on when you're doing a student visa process to avoid problems. It doesn't happen to most people. I don't want to say it's like, but it does happen.
I guess another question is, can you enter the U.S. like if you lost your I-20 and weren't able to get one in time?
You can always enter. CBP has the right to let you in. They'll talk with you. They'll go contact ICE. They'll bring it up in the system. So they'll put you in secondary and they'll try to go through it. But you can have an officer that doesn't want to. and say, no, you don't have the paperwork, you're out. So it depends on how strict they want to be. Typically, yeah, they'll just do the extra work and find the record and contact the school, contact ICE and do it and all that kind of stuff. But you don't want to go through that because they have the authority to just, give you voluntary withdrawal and say, go back and get the report. Now, one thing that happened in COVID is they don't have the requirement that you get the original signed I-20, which you used to need. A copy, they said, is fine temporarily for COVID-19. Now, will the officer that you're going to deal with at the airport have read that memo and be aware of that? Probably, not always, maybe not. So there's always some crazy issues that pop up. And I was going to get to tax. I remember you asked about tax, but any other questions about OPT, CPT before we get into that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so taxation is a very important issue. You should talk with an accountant about that. But one little known thing people aren't aware of is if you spend too much time in the United States, and a student always does, because it's really like you spend more than 180 days in the United States, you automatically become a U.S. person for taxation purposes. So everyone has to file taxes one way or another. And the way the U.S. does taxes, one is they tax on global income, which, if you're a student, not necessarily making income unless you have assets. And many times, international students come from wealthy families so they can afford to do this. And so their parents might have bought them a rental property that they're making money off. You might have to report that to the IRS. Now, accountants have different countries have tax treaties with the United States. So if you're paying taxes in your home country, you won't have to pay that here and this kind of stuff. It depends on what country you're from, and that goes to accounting. And it's very hard to find an international accountant that knows how to do this stuff. After 10 years of practicing, I haven't been able to find an accountant that I could rely on that. So good luck. But that issue does exist. But the other issue is not only filing taxes on international income, the issue is America, in around 2012, the U.S. passed this rule because they want to make sure they know where Americans' money is in case they're avoiding taxes, that you have to declare your bank accounts, I think more than $5,000 or $10,000. And if you don't, there's severe fines and punishments for it. And so once you're in the U.S. as a student, you're subject to U.S. taxation eventually. You have to declare your bank accounts under, I think it's called FACTA or something like that. You can talk to an accountant. I'm not the best person to talk about this. The F-bar, they have these names like that. And so you have to do it. Now, do most students do that? No. Does anything happen to all of those? Very rarely. I've never heard of it happen. That is the rule, not enforced, but it is the rule. So, always talk to an accountant to avoid these kind of issues. Over time, the administration is going to see that this, and I'm talking about it publicly, that this rule exists that's not being enforced, and they'll start enforcing it. It's inevitable. So better to be safe rather than sorry. But that's the general situation. Not enforced, but you're supposed to file taxes. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to pay taxes, but you got to do the paperwork and make the government aware of your finances on global income.
So if you're not making any income, do you still have to file taxes as an international student or no?
Well, if you're not, IRS, again, this is accounting stuff, but it has rules where if you're not making income, you're not supposed to file taxes, but you are supposed to declare foreign bank accounts. So you might file a blank tax that declares a bank account. That may be a requirement. Now, one issue that pops up is, well, you might not have a social security number. How are you going to file taxes? Well, you get what's called an ITIN number potentially. It goes into a lot of complicated stuff. The problem is because it's never been enforced, and so we haven't seen examples of it, immediately it's like there's not that much guidance on what to do because no one's ever had to really deal with it. There's a lot of these, especially in immigration, a lot of rules that are not enforced, so we don't deal with the nuances of it, and accountants don't see it pop up often either. So like how do you file? I don't necessarily know without a social security number, but unless you have an ITIN number, ITIN. But there's never been issues with it, so we haven't been forced to deal with it. Hopefully we won't have to, but that is part of the rules that as a lawyer I have to tell people and leave it up to them to look into with an accountant.
Yeah, and I think one of the last things is, could you briefly go through the different types of work visas that international students could apply?
Yeah, this is a very important question because people don't know. So first of all, the F-1 student visa itself leads to nothing other than OPT potentially. There's no status you get from it. Now, some foreign countries, if you're here as a student long enough, they'll give you residency, not the United States. So the U.S. has a two-pronged system. There's non-immigrant visas and immigrant visas. Non-immigrant visas are here for temporary stay. So an F-1 student visa is a non-immigrant visa. And there's work visas that people get after that, typically what's called the H-1B, which is for college graduates to get a special job. That's a non-immigrant visa as well, but you need an employer to hire you, and there's limited numbers of that each year. There's the O-1 visa for extraordinary ability, which is very flexible. So people think extraordinary ability means athletes and artists, but it could be a myriad of things that, as long as you show you're good at what you do, you have a claim in it, you potentially get the O-1 visa. And so those are the basic work permits. There's more. There's an L1 intercompany transfer. And I actually have one F1 student from a foreign country. His family owns a big company, and he came here to study and get a management degree at a top school to go back and manage it. And I said, well, if you go back home, manage that company as a higher up for a year, and then they create a subsidiary and they transfer you to US, we could do an L1 intercompany transfer. There's also the E2 visa, which is very interesting, especially for students and graduate students, which is if you're investing and starting a business in the United States and there's no minimum amount of money, it's just enough money to start a good business that's successful, you could run your business and be working here, or potentially work for another company that has the E2 visa. But a requirement of the E2 visa is that the country you have passport or passports from have a E2 treaty or E1 treaty with the United States that allows this. Now, Brazil, China, India, Russia, all these major countries do not have this treaty, but most European countries, Japan, Australia, have this treaty where you could come and start a business in the United States, or let's take the example of Japan. If a Japanese company or Japanese person start a business in the United States, you as another Japanese person could come and transfer to work for that company as well. Again, these are really complex visas, but these options do exist on the non-immigrant route. On the immigrant-based, the system is designed for primarily 2 ways plus some. So the some are if you're an asylee, you just declare asylum, which a lot of students do. They may come here and finally feel open about themselves and declare themselves part of the LGBT community and not be able to go back home, so they declare asylum. They may change their religion and all of a sudden they can't go back to their home country because of the dangers that possesses. They may get very political and not be able to return to their home country. So asylum does exist. There is this 1-year bar where you have to file for asylum within 1 year of arriving unless there's changed circumstances. So you came here as a student, you've been here for 4 years, all of a sudden you want to claim asylum. They're like, well, why don't you say it 3 years ago or 3.5 years ago? We say, well, I just realized today that I'm gay and I can't go back to my home country because they'll kill me. So that goes into that. There's also the diversity visa lottery. These are the smaller programs. Asylum's not that small, but I'm going to focus on the other ones. Diversity visa is the green card lottery. Many countries could file for it every year. If you're chosen, which happens a lot, F1 students, you get to get a green card. Right now, because of the travel bans, it's a disaster, but that's generally it. The main programs are twofold. One are family-based, and secondly, employment-based. And that's what the immigration system, when it was created and after World War II, was focused on the United States and what President Trump is trying to get rid of. And so family-based, primarily, and most of my clients are people going to school, they fall in love with a classmate, get married, and because you enter lawfully with a student visa, as long as you have clean history with regards to immigration, not lying or something like that, no criminal issues, and financially both of you are okay, and the relationship is real, obviously, then you can file for a green card based on marriage, which is like my bread and butter, what I do on a daily basis. The other option is if you're other types of relatives. The problem with those categories, it takes a long time. So if you are a US citizen, you can apply for your brother and sister to get a green card, but that could take 10, 15, 20 years to get. So in the meantime, there's nothing you could do. You have to maintain lawful status in the United States to get that green card eventually, or leave your home country and wait it out. So the fast routes really are marriage. You're a minor child of a U.S. citizen or green card holder or parent of a U.S. citizen. But marriage is the typical route for students when they do this. Or they may have had, an aunt or an uncle file for them 15 years ago. They're here on a student visa and all of a sudden the time comes to get a green card and they could do what's called adjustment of status, apply for the green card from the United States. But the other option for students is employment-based. So there's 5 employment-based categories. The 5th one is an investor program, which has gotten harder and harder and more expensive, but essentially $1 million or more you invest, create 10 full-time jobs, you get a green card. It's much more complex than that, and it's a mess. But if someone's interested in that, they definitely need to just consult with an attorney in private to learn more about that. Primarily, people from China and India are the bulk of that program, more Vietnam nowadays, but all over the world have that. There's backlogs in it too. The EB4, the 4th category, I'm not going to go into, but those are special kind of immigration cases. There's 3 before that. There's EB1, EB2, and EB3. Typically, a lot of students get OPT. After OPT, they get H-1B, which is a work visa, and then the employer files for their EB2 or EB3 green card. And these are green cards based on education, skill, training, and this kind of stuff. And there's some categories are faster, some are slower, and it depends on what country you're born in. So if you're born in India, unfortunately, there's a huge catastrophic backlog in that, so it's not really the best option for Indians. But that's what you see when they talk about the controversy of the H-1B and the green card programs. It hurts Indians the most because, frankly, H-1Bs primarily go to India. It's the biggest category, and those people eventually get the work visas, so their backlog category is really huge, especially because they have families that come and all that kind of stuff. And just India, just backlog in general. But there's these other categories, the EB1A, because EB1 goes into subcategories. But the EB1A is for people with extraordinary ability. Now, I talked about the O1, and I'm just hearing myself right now, all these letters and stuff. I know it's confusing. But if you're really, really top of what you do, you could get an EB1A green card. So I've got one for a race car driver. I've got one for top doctors, dentists, actors, actresses, comedians, singers, models, all that kind of stuff. And you don't need to have a job lined up. You just say, I'm the best and let me do it. Like people win athletes, swimmers. I help actually swimmers in college. I've had NCAA top swimmers get it. That's kind of stuff. I just remember as a college student I did last year. But there's also one called the EB2C National Interest Waiver. On my YouTube channel for JK Law Firm, I have a breakdown of what the rules are. It's an old video. It's kind of, the editing quality is not as good. But nonetheless, that you're showing you're doing some work that's in the national interest. So you, like, for example, with COVID-19, you might have been a graduate student in your home country studying vaccines. And now you're in the United States getting your PhD and you're studying, diseases that are spread out. And you say, well, listen, I know this field, I've been doing work, I've published papers, and I'm in the United States, and you don't have to be in this United States necessarily, but I'm doing work that's going to really help out the national interest of the United States because I'm going to solve potentially COVID-19 or these kind of disease issues. Please give me a green card because I'm working on something that's going to be national in scope, helping America, and have good experience in it that I could back up with showing those citations and stuff like that. And that's why you should let me get a green card. And they'll make this national interest waiver exception and give you a green card. And the line for that, unfortunately for Indians, is so long because it's considered an EB2 category. But nonetheless, if you're waiting on your H-1B or if you're an F-1 student, hopefully that'll give you time for that to come through. And so that's a bird's eye view, airplane view of the immigration system. There's a lot more stuff, but hopefully I didn't overwhelm people watching.
Yeah, no, that was really great. Thank you for the overview. We're out of questions here, and I think there aren't any left. I think you touched on this, but someone's asking really quickly, how is all of this going to change with the current landscape in terms of would it be harder to get employment visas?
Well, right now there's travel bans, so if you're outside the United States, it's harder. Most of the travel bans affect people outside the United States because the president's authority to stop people from coming in is much stronger than doing stuff internally. But until they actually do something and we read the text of what they say, it's very hard to know exactly what the nuances of it are. So it's very hard to say what's going to happen, what's not. Just a quick note, I did do an ebook called the Ultimate Marriage Green Card ebook. That's 30 plus pages breaking down the marriage immigration process. And it just really breaks it down better than anyone I've ever seen do it because I downloaded everyone else's book. If you're interested in that book, go to marriageimmigrationlaw.com/ebook. And it breaks the process of getting the green card through the embassy, within the United States, what they need for the interview, the marriage, all that kind of stuff. And so that'll help you there. But with regards to how things are going to happen in the future, I never would have thought where we're at right now. So it's unknown what's going to happen in the future, how belligerent they want to be. Sometimes they get nice and they give good stuff too. Hopefully I'll be it too. But it's really hard to see, to look past a few hours from now, really, in immigration currently.
All right, looks like Instagram's going to cut us off in 20 seconds. So from all of us at Internationals at USC and those watching from home, a very big thank you to you, John, for all the time and all the information that you gave us. It was very invaluable. And to everyone who's watching, we will be uploading this live as well as linking all of John's social media where you can find regular updates about the immigration landscape. So yeah, thank you very much to everyone.
You got it. Thanks, everyone.